The accusation came at 4:18 on a Thursday afternoon in the open marble lobby of the 11th floor of a building on Wabash Avenue in Chicago, in front of 6 junior associates, 2 paralegals, and the receptionist. The woman being accused was Constanza Hale, 66 years old, the head of evening housekeeping for the law firm of Brennan, Petty and Marsh, who had been cleaning that particular floor for 11 years and the building for 31. She was wearing a navy uniform smock and the worn brown leather handbag she had carried to work every day for the better part of 2 decades. The man doing the accusing was Royce Brennan, the managing partner of the firm, 44 years old, in a charcoal suit and a tie he had been complimented on twice that day. He held in his hand a thin silver pen that he claimed was an heirloom. He told Constanza, in a voice pitched to carry across the lobby, that she had been seen on the security footage near his office the night before, that she was the only person who had access to the floor between the hours of 9 and 11 p.m., and that he was personally embarrassed for her that it had come to this. He told her she was terminated, effective immediately. He told her not to make a scene. He told her that, out of consideration for her years of service, the firm would not be pressing charges, but that she would need to surrender her access card and leave the building under escort. Constanza did not raise her voice. She did not argue. She did not deny anything. She unclipped the access card from the strap of the worn brown handbag. She set it on the marble counter in front of Royce Brennan, with the careful placement of a woman who had practiced the gesture in her head before, though never for the reason it was being practiced for now. She picked up the handbag. She walked to the elevator. What Royce Brennan did not know, as he watched the elevator doors close on a woman he had just humiliated in front of his entire firm, was that the building those doors opened onto, the 11th floor in particular, the marble lobby, the elevator itself, and the parking structure 2 levels below, had belonged to Constanza Hale for 27 years. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The building was called the Hartwell, and it sat on the corner of Wabash and Adams in the financial district. 22 stories of pre-war limestone with a marble lobby that had been added in 1962 and a brass-doored elevator bank that had been refurbished in stages 3 times since. The Hartwell had been purchased in 1996 by a man named Lionel Hale, who had been an immigration attorney with a small practice on the 4th floor for 17 years before he had quietly bought the building from the estate of its previous owner with the help of a family loan from his wife's parents. Lionel had told no one in the building that he was the new owner. He had wanted to remain the immigration attorney on the 4th floor. He had hired a property management company to handle the day-to-day operation under his direction. He had instructed the management company, in writing, that under no circumstances was any tenant of the building to be informed of his ownership, and that any inquiries should be directed to the management company alone. Lionel had died of pancreatic cancer in 1999 at the age of 52. He had left the building, the small immigration practice, and the modest house in Hyde Park where he and Constanza had raised their 2 daughters, to his wife in full. Constanza had been 39 years old. She had been a paralegal at Lionel's firm. She had been the office manager for the immigration practice. She had been, by Lionel's own description in the letter he had written for her to find in the desk drawer of his office after his death, the actual organizing intelligence behind every successful case the firm had brought in 17 years. She had not gone to law school. She had not needed to. Lionel had written, in that letter, that he had wanted her to know the firm could have been hers if she had ever wanted it, and that the building was hers either way, and that she should do with both of them whatever she wanted to do, and that she should not let anyone, including their daughters, talk her into being smaller than the woman she was. Constanza had kept the letter in the worn brown leather handbag for 27 years. She had not run the firm. She had let the firm dissolve quietly. She had retained the property management company. She had kept the building. She had raised the two daughters. She had paid for both of them to go to graduate school, one at the University of Chicago in public health and one at Northwestern in social work. And she had paid for both of their weddings. And she had paid the property taxes on the Hyde Park house and the Hartwell building out of the rental income for 27 years, without ever once being asked by either of her daughters where the money had come from. They had thought, the way children think when a parent does not correct them, that there was a small pension from their father's practice. There was not. There was a building. In 2014, 11 years before Royce Brennan accused her of stealing his silver pen, Constanza had taken on a second job. She had hired herself, through an arrangement she made with a commercial cleaning contractor that already serviced the building, as a member of the evening housekeeping team for the 11th floor. She had done this for one reason. The 11th floor had been Lionel's last office. The immigration practice had outgrown the 4th floor suite in 1991, and Lionel had moved the firm up to the 11th, into the corner suite with the windows that looked north toward the Loop. He had died in that office. Not literally, he had died in a hospital, but in every way that mattered. He had written his last brief in that office. He had drafted his last asylum petition in that office. He had folded his last set of glasses on that desk before driving home for the last time in 1999. Constanza had wanted to be in that room. She had not wanted to be in that room as the owner of the building, because the owner of the building did not have any particular reason to spend time on the 11th floor in the dark. She had wanted to be in that room the way Lionel had been in it, as a worker, with a task, with her hands doing something useful. She had been doing it for 11 years. She had cleaned that office every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday evening for 11 years in a Navy uniform smock with a cart and a vacuum cleaner and a small bottle of glass cleaner she filled herself from a larger bottle she kept in a closet on the 3rd floor. The law firm that had taken over the corner suite in 2002, Brennan, Petty & Marsh, had cycled through 3 different managing partners in the time she had been cleaning their floor. She had not introduced herself to any of them. She had been Connie, to the receptionist, to the paralegals, to the night security guard. She had never used her last name in the building. She had carried Lionel's name in the worn brown handbag with the letter, and she had not needed anyone in the building to know what it was. That was what Royce Brennan hadn't understood. Until now. Royce Brennan had been the managing partner of Brennan, Petty & Marsh for 3 years. He had taken over from a man named Donovan Petty, who had retired to Arizona at 68. Royce had been 41 when he had been elevated. He had been an aggressive attorney with a strong commercial litigation book and a personality that the senior partners had described to each other in their internal discussions about succession as the kind that does very well at trial. They had not entirely meant it as a compliment. They had elevated him anyway, because the firm had needed someone to bring in business, and Royce had been bringing in business. He had begun, in the past 18 months, to mention to his partners that he believed certain of the firm's vendors had become complacent. He had told his executive committee that he believed the housekeeping arrangements in particular were sloppy, that the night staff were not adequately supervised, and that he had had personal items disappear from his office on at least 2 occasions in the past year. He had not specified the items. He had not filed a report with the building or with the contractor. He had simply mentioned it to his partners over drinks, twice. In the same way a man mentions a thing he intends to do something about later. On the Wednesday evening of the week of the firing, Royce Brennan had returned to the office at 9:47 p.m. to retrieve a folder he had left on his desk. He had passed Constanza in the hallway. She had nodded to him. He had not nodded back. She had been wiping down the brass plate on the corner of the elevator bank with a cloth she carried in her cart. She had been there for 40 minutes already that evening. She had cleaned his office that evening at 8:20 p.m., the way she did every Wednesday. She had emptied his trash. She had wiped down his desk. She had dusted the small silver pen that he kept in a brass cup on the desk's edge. The pen he claimed had been his grandfather's. The pen he had told 3 different paralegals about in the past month. She had not moved the pen. She had dusted around it. She had moved on to the next office. The pen had been on his desk when she had left the floor at 10:31 p.m. She knew this because she had passed the office on her way to the elevator, and she had glanced through the open door, and she had seen the pen in the brass cup, and she had filed it away the way she filed away small things, quietly, without yet deciding what it meant that she had felt the need to check. She had felt the need to check because Royce Brennan had been speaking over the past month in a tone of voice that she had heard before. She had heard it from a partner at Lionel's old firm in 1987. She had heard it from a tenant of the Hartwell in 2003 who had eventually been evicted for harassing a different cleaning crew. She had heard it again in the past year, in a way that had begun to make her think about Lionel's letter and what he had written about not being smaller than the woman she was. She had been thinking about the letter for almost 6 months. That was the part Royce Brennan had never been able to account for in his planning, because he had not known she had been planning. He had spent 3 years assuming Connie was a woman who would absorb whatever he gave her because she had no choice. He had been wrong about the most important thing. She had every choice. She had simply chosen, for 11 years, to keep using none of them. Patience was the most practiced skill she had. It was just the one he had only ever seen her use on him, which was not the same as seeing it used at all. She didn't move fast. On the Thursday afternoon, after she had set her access card on the marble counter and walked to the elevator, Constanza Hale rode down to the lobby. She walked across the marble floor that had been laid the year before she was born. She walked out of the building through the revolving door. She walked 1 block east to a small cafe on the corner of Adams and Michigan, where she sat at a table by the window, ordered a cup of coffee with cream, and called her younger daughter Beatrice, who was a partner at a public interest law firm in the Loop, and who had been waiting for this call for 3 years. "It happened today," Constanza said. "I want you to come get me. And I want you to bring Margot." Beatrice did not ask what had happened. She did not need to. She had been told the broad shape of the plan 2 years earlier, in her mother's kitchen, on the night Constanza had first decided that the men currently leasing her late father's office had begun to act like men who needed a lesson the building itself could deliver if they pushed it far enough. Beatrice had not been told it would be a firing. She had been told only that her mother would know when it was time, and that her mother would call her when it was time, and that the lawyers, Margot Saroff, the senior real estate partner at Beatrice's firm, and a property litigator named Curtis Wan, who had been Lionel's clerk in 1985 and had become one of the city's most respected commercial leasing attorneys, would be ready to act on 12 hours' notice. Beatrice drove down to the cafe. She arrived 22 minutes after the call. She did not bring Margot with her. Margot was already at the building. Constanza and Beatrice drove from the cafe to the offices of Saroff, Wan and Pelletier, on the 23rd floor of a different building 4 blocks south, where Margot Saroff, 58 years old, in a charcoal pantsuit and the kind of reading glasses Constanza had always found both elegant and slightly intimidating, was waiting in the conference room with a leather notebook on the table and 3 folders arranged in a precise sequence. Margot poured Constanza coffee. She sat down across from her. She opened the notebook. "I am going to tell you what we have," Margot said, "and I am going to show you what we kept. I need you to let me get through all of it before you make any decisions tonight." Constanza nodded. She did not interrupt. She drank the coffee. The first folder contained the lease between the Hartwell Building, LLC, the entity Constanza had set up in 2003 to hold title to the building under a structure Lionel had originally drafted in 1997, and Brennan, Petty and Marsh, P.C. The lease had been signed in 2002 with the firm's then managing partner, a man named Wallace Marsh, who had died in 2011. It had been renewed twice. The current term ran through the end of the calendar year, with a renewal option exercisable by the tenant only on written notice, provided no fewer than 90 days before the end of the term, and with a separate provision that allowed the landlord to terminate the lease for cause on 30 days written notice in the event of certain enumerated tenant conduct, including, and Margot had highlighted this clause in yellow 9 months earlier, false statements made by the tenant or any of its agents in connection with the tenancy, including but not limited to false statements concerning building staff, building security, or any other party operating under the landlord's authority. The lease termination clause had been drafted, originally, by Lionel Hale. He had put it into every lease the building signed for the rest of his life because he had been an immigration attorney, and he had known, in a way many landlords did not know, what it cost a working person to be falsely accused. Margot had been drafting the termination letter for 9 months. She had been waiting for the predicate. The second folder contained the surveillance review. Curtis Wan, working with a forensic security consultant whose firm Constanza had retained 6 months earlier under a confidentiality agreement, had obtained, by subpoena issued under a separate small claims matter Constanza had initiated and then quietly dropped, the complete security footage from the 11th floor for the past 90 days. The footage showed Constanza cleaning Royce Brennan's office on Wednesday evening, dusting the brass cup containing the silver pen, replacing the pen in the cup, and leaving the office at 8:41 p.m. The footage showed the office empty from 8:41 p.m. until 9:46 p.m. The footage then showed Royce Brennan entering the office at 9:46, sitting at his desk, picking up the silver pen, examining it, and placing it in the inside breast pocket of his suit jacket. The footage showed him leaving the office at 9:51 with the pen in his pocket. He had pocketed the pen himself. He had then, the following day, instructed his receptionist to pull the 11th floor access logs for the previous night, and to confirm that only the cleaning crew had been on the floor between 9 and 11 p.m. He had then waited until the end of the workday on Thursday and accused Constanza Hale, in front of the entire firm, of stealing a pen he had walked out of the building with in his own pocket. The third folder contained the criminal referral. Curtis Wan had spent the past 6 hours since Constanza's call from the CAF preparing a filing with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office regarding false police reports, false statements made to a third-party contractor in furtherance of a wrongful termination, and a potential count of insurance fraud if the firm had any pending claim on the office contents that had referenced the missing pen, which the firm did. The referral had not yet been filed. It would be filed by 10 the following morning, at Constanza's discretion, depending on what she wanted to do. Margot turned the page. "There is one more thing," Margot said, "and I sat with this one for 2 days before I decided whether to include it. 3 weeks ago, Royce Brennan personally approached the property management company about whether the building owner, whom he has never met and whom he has been told for 23 years is a passive private investor represented through counsel, would be willing to sell. He offered, on behalf of an investor group he claims to represent, $41 million cash. The current appraised value of the building is $78 million. He told the management company that the owner was likely an elderly person with no understanding of the current market, and that this was, in his words, a friendly first offer that would benefit everyone. The management company declined on the owner's behalf, as instructed. Constanza read the third folder once. She folded the offer letter in half, and in half again, and put it inside Lionel's letter in the worn brown leather handbag. She looked at the documents on the conference table. The lease, the footage transcript, the pen in the inside breast pocket, the $41 million offer. She looked at all of it together the way Lionel had taught her in 1984, to look at a case file the night before a hearing, not at any single document, but at the way the documents arranged themselves into a story, and at where the story pointed. She could see exactly where the lines connected. She could see what Royce Brennan had been doing for 3 years. She could see why he had needed her firing to be public. She could see, with the same quiet recognition she had felt at the marble counter in the lobby, that the man currently leasing her late husband's last office had been planning to buy a building from a woman he believed did not know what it was worth, and that the woman he believed that about had been letting him think it because she had not yet decided what she wanted to do about him. She could see all of it. Margot refilled her coffee. She arrived 19 minutes early. She liked it that way. She wore a charcoal suit she had bought 22 years earlier for Lionel's funeral and had kept in a garment bag in the closet of the Hyde Park house. She wore the worn brown leather handbag. She wore a small gold pin on her lapel that had been her mother's. She rode up to the 11th floor in the elevator she had ridden in the Navy uniform smock for 11 years. The receptionist, a young woman named Hallie Penn, who had been on the lobby desk the previous afternoon when Constanza had been escorted out, looked up from her monitor. She put one hand on the edge of her desk to steady herself. She did not know yet what was happening. She knew only that the woman she had watched walk out of the building in a uniform the previous day had just walked back in wearing a suit, and that the woman was accompanied by 3 lawyers in suits more expensive than her own. Margot spoke first. She gave Hallie Penn her business card. She asked, politely, to be shown to the conference room. She asked, politely, for Mr. Brennan to be informed that the building's owner had arrived for a scheduled meeting at 9, and that the firm's counsel should also be present. Hallie Penn picked up the phone. She did not look at Constanza. She did not yet have a way of looking at Constanza. Royce Brennan came out of his office at 9:06 in a different charcoal suit from the day before. He was already speaking before he had reached the lobby. He told Margot Saroff that he had not been informed of any meeting. He told her that he was not in the habit of being ambushed by counsel he did not recognize. He told her she would need to schedule through his executive assistant. He looked, finally, at the woman in the charcoal suit standing beside Margot Saroff. He looked at her face. He looked at the worn brown handbag. His face went through 3 things in 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, something that looked very much like the marble floor opening beneath him. "Connie," he said. "Mrs. Hale," Margot said. "Mr. Brennan, my client is Constanza Hale, the sole member of Hartwell Building, LLC, which is the owner of this building and which has been the owner of this building since 1996. We would like to be shown to the conference room. We will need approximately 20 minutes of your time. I would strongly suggest you call your firm's counsel." Royce Brennan called his firm's counsel. In the conference room, the same conference room in which Royce Brennan had, 3 weeks earlier, dictated the offer letter for $41 million. Curtis Wan opened the folder. He laid the lease on the table. He laid the lease termination clause on the table beside it, highlighted in yellow. He laid the surveillance footage transcript on the table. He laid the time-stamped still photograph of Royce Brennan with the silver pen in his inside breast pocket on the table. He did not raise his voice. He read the documents into the record the way a notary reads a deed at closing. When he had finished, Margot Saroff spoke. Effective this morning, the lease between Hartwell Building, LLC and Brennan, Petty and Marsh, P.C. is terminated for cause under Section 14C, based on documented false statements made by the tenant's managing partner concerning a member of the building's contracted staff. The firm has 30 days from this morning to vacate the premises. A formal notice of termination is being delivered to your reception desk as we speak. The firm's option to renew the lease for an additional term is, as of this morning, void. We will not be entertaining any further offers on the building from this firm or any investor group represented by this firm. We will be referring the matter of the silver pen to the state's attorney's office by 10 this morning, unless the firm and Mr. Brennan personally choose to issue, in writing and on the firm's letterhead, by close of business today, a complete retraction of yesterday's accusation. A full apology to Mrs. Hale circulated to every employee who witnessed the incident. A settlement payment of $140,000 to Mrs. Hale in lieu of any civil claim she may bring for defamation. And Mr. Brennan's resignation from the firm. The firm has until 5 o'clock this afternoon to inform us in writing of its position. Royce Brennan had not spoken in 11 minutes. He spoke now. "Connie," he said again, "I want to apologize. I am so sorry. I had no idea." Constanza spoke for the first time since she had walked into the conference room. She said it quietly, only for him, not his performance, because it was meant for him. "That is the part you got right, Mr. Brennan. You had no idea. You had no idea who I was for 11 years. You had no idea what kind of woman cleaned the office in which my husband wrote his last brief. You had no idea why I was here. You had no idea what was in this handbag. You had no idea that the building you tried to buy from me for less than half its value was a building I have owned since you were in college. You did not need to know any of these things to treat me well. You only needed to know that I was a person. You failed to know that. The rest of it is just consequence." She stood up. She picked up the worn brown handbag. She buttoned the charcoal suit. She did not look at Royce Brennan again. She walked out without looking back. It did not happen all at once. The retraction and apology were issued by close of business that Friday. The settlement check arrived at Margot Saroff's office the following Monday. Royce Brennan resigned that same day, on terms his remaining partners had insisted on. Brennan, Petty and Marsh vacated the 11th floor within 30 days. They moved to a smaller suite in a different building, 6 blocks south, at a higher per square foot cost. Royce Brennan was not hired by another firm in Chicago. He moved, eventually, to a city in another state, where he did corporate work for a regional company at a salary considerably smaller than the one he had been earning when he had walked into the marble lobby on a Thursday afternoon to humiliate a woman over a pen. Constanza did not lease the 11th floor again to another law firm. She had it gutted to the studs, the carpet removed, the partition walls taken down, and the corner suite restored to roughly the configuration Lionel had used in 1991. She moved the small immigration practice that had been operating out of a Pilsen storefront on a shoestring for 11 years, Lionel's old practice name, kept alive by a younger attorney named Ezra Mahan, who had been a clerk for Lionel in 1996 and had taken over the practice on a handshake, into the corner suite on the 11th floor of the Hartwell, at a rent of $1 per year. She made it a condition of the lease that any client who could not afford full representation would not be charged. She put a small brass plate on the door with Lionel's name on it. She visited the office on Wednesdays. Hallie Penn, the receptionist who had not known how to look at Constanza on the morning of the meeting, was offered a position with the immigration practice as an office manager. She accepted. She was very good at it. Beatrice brought her mother a small succulent in a clay pot the week the immigration office opened on the 11th floor. No card. Constanza set it on the windowsill of the corner office herself, in the spot where Lionel had kept his coffee in the morning. She watered it on Thursdays. On a Wednesday evening in late October, 2 years after she had ridden the elevator down from the 11th floor for the last time as the head of evening housekeeping, Constanza Hale stood at the window of the corner office at the Hartwell with a cup of coffee. The sun had gone down behind the buildings on the west side of the loop. The marble lobby downstairs had emptied for the night. She could hear, faintly, the sound of the vacuum cleaner on the floor above, where a new cleaning crew was working through their evening rounds. She took Lionel's letter out of the worn brown handbag. She read it once. She folded it back into the envelope. She put it back in the bag. She finished the coffee. She went home and turned out the light. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.